Church and State, Roman Catholic view of relations between. Pius IX in 1851 censured the teaching of the Canonists in Turin, because he allowed only the power of spiritual punishment to the Church. And in the Concordat made in 1863 with the republics of South America, it is laid down in Article 8 that the civil authorities are absolutely bound to execute every penalty decreed by the spiritual courts. In a statement addressed by Pius IX to Count de Valdebulli, published in the Allgemeine Zeitung of November 13, 1864, the power of the Church over the government of civil society, and its direct jurisdiction in temporal matters, is expressly guarded. It follows that they are greatly mistaken who suppose that the biblical and old Christian spirit has prevailed in the Church over the medieval notion of her being an institution with coercive power to imprison, hang, and burn. On the contrary, these doctrines are to receive fresh sanction from a general council, the Vatican, and that proud theory of the popes, that they could force kings and magistrates, by excommunication and its consequences, to carry out their sentences of confiscation, imprisonment, and death, is now to become an infallible dogma. It follows that not only is the old institution of the Inquisition justified, but it is recommended as an urgent necessity in view of the unbelief of the present age. The Pope and the Council Janus, Drive, J. Ign. von Bollinger, R. C. pp. 11, 12, London, Rivingtons, 1869. Church and State, under Constantine. It must be observed that a great change took place in the feelings and conduct of the Christians from the period that Constantine formed a political alliance with the Church, and constituted the clergy into a corporate body. The great benefits which the inhabitants of the Roman Empire had previously derived from the connection of their bishops and presbyters with local national feelings, was then neutralized. The Church became a political institution of the Roman Empire, dependent, like every other department of the public administration, on the emperor's authority, and henceforward, whenever the ministers and teachers of the Christian religion became closely connected with national feelings, they were accused of heresy. Greece under the Romans, George Finley, LL.D., p. h. 89. T. London, J. M. Dent and Company, New York, E. P. Dutton and Company. Church and State, J. Injurious effect of state power. If the reign of Constantine bears witness that the state which seeks to advance Christianity by the worldly means at its command, may be the occasion of more injury to this holy cause than the earthly power which opposes it with whatever virulence, this truth is still more clearly demonstrated by the reign of his successor, Constantius. General History of the Christian Religion and Church, Dr. Augustus Neander, translated by Joseph Torrey, Volume Ill, p. 41, Edinburgh, T. and T. Clark, 1848, Church and State, Union of, in Roman Empire. With the commencement of this period, the Church entered into an entirely different relation to the State. It did not merely become a whole, recognized as legal, and tolerated by the State, which it had been already from the reign of Galen down to the Diocletian persecution, but the State itself declared its principles to be those to which everything must be subordinated. Christianity became, by degrees, the dominant state religion, though not entirely in the same sense as paganism had been before. Church and State constituted, henceforth, two wholes, one interpenetrating the other, and standing in a relation of mutual action and reaction. The advantageous influence of this was, that the Church could now exert its transforming power also on the relations of the State, but the measure and the character of this power depended on the state of the inner life in the Church itself. The healthful influence of the Church is indeed to be perceived in many particular cases, though it was very far from being so mighty as it must have been, had everything proceeded from the spirit of genuine Christianity, and had the State actually subordinated itself to this spirit. But on the other hand, the Church had now to struggle under a great disadvantage, for instead of being left free, as it was before, to pursue its own course of development, it was subjected to the influence of a foreign, secular power, which in various ways would operate to check and disturb it, and the danger in this case increased in the same proportion as the political life with which the Church came in contact was corrupt, and a lawless, despotic will ruled supreme, a will which acknowledged no restraints, and which, therefore, whenever it intermeddled with the church development, was prone to act after the same arbitrary manner as it did elsewhere. So it actually happened in the East Roman Empire. Without doubt, it belongs to the essential character of Christianity that it can propagate itself even under the most depressing of earthly relations, and by the surpassing energy of its spirit, break through every species of temporal bondage. This was seen under the empire of pagan Rome and in the Persian Empire. Despotism, arrayed in open hostility to Christianity, only served to call forth, in still greater strength, the Christian sense of freedom rising superior to all earthly constraint. But despotism in outward alliance with the Church, proved a more dangerous enemy. It was now necessary that one of two things should happen: either the spirit of Christianity, as it became more widely diffused, must, not by a sudden and glaring revolution, but by its power in the heart, which is far mightier than any arm of flesh, gradually introduce the order of law in the place of arbitrary despotism, or the corruption of the state would introduce itself into the Church, as it actually did in the Byzantine Empire. Furthermore, the Church was now exposed to the temptation of appropriating a foreign might for the prosecution of its ends, a temptation ever ready to assail man, the moment the spirit is no longer sovereign alone, but the flesh intermeddles with its proper work, looking only at the holy end which he fancies himself in pursuit of. Any means that can subserve it seem good to him. He does not consider that the truth itself, forced on man otherwise than by its own inward power, becomes falsehood. How easily might the bishops, in their zeal, more or less unwise, more or less directed by selfish views, be tempted to invite those emperors who profess to belong to the Catholic Church, to assist in securing the victory for that which they deemed the pure doctrine, and in crushing its adversaries, when, in fact, the Syrian bishops, in the previous period, had already sought after the aid of a pagan emperor, or Aurelian, in a similar case. And in cases of this sort, how invariably did the wrong proceeding bring along its own punishment, in forgetting and denying its own essential character, on the simple preservation of which its true power depends, in consenting to make use of a foreign might for the furtherance of its ends. The Church succumbed to that might. Such is the lesson taught by the history of the Church of the Roman Empire in the East, General History of the Christian Religion and Church, Dr. Augustus Neander, translated by Joseph Torrey, Volume Ill, pp. 175, 176, Edinburgh, T. and T. Clark, 1848, Church and State, a struggle predicted. If the authors of the movement, to reconstruct the world, are not deceived, the generations that will come up after I am no more will witness a struggle on the widest scale, and of very long duration, during which will disappear all that to us is known as modern liberties, all that to Rome is known as the modern state, and at the close of which the ecclesiastical power will stand alone, presiding over the destinies of a reconstituted world, the Pope, the kings, and the people. William Arthur, A. M. Preface, p. 17, London, Rotter and Stoughton, 1903. Church and State, Roman Catholic View of. Since the Council of Trent, the revolutions in France, Austria, and Italy have separated the civil powers from the unity of the Church. The nations remain Catholic as before, but many public laws are at variance with the laws of the Church. The old forms of usage and of arrangement need revision, in order to bring into peaceful cooperation the two supreme authorities on which the welfare of society reposes. If the governments of the world know their own highest interests, they will recognize the necessity of entering into loyal and honorable relations of confidence and cooperation with a power which pervades, sometimes a large proportion, sometimes the whole population, subject to their civil rule. The Church pervades at least 1/4, if not a third, of the population of Great Britain and its colonies, about a fifth of the United States, nearly a half of the Prussian monarchy, and almost the entire population of other great kingdoms. And the influence of religion is that which most deeply affects the loyalty and fidelity of nations. It is of the highest moment to the civil powers of the world to readjust their relations with the Catholic Church, for so long as the public laws are at variance with its divine rights and liberties, internal peace and fidelity are hardly to be secured. Peter A. Privileging Henry Edward Manning, R.C., First Pastoral Letter, pp. 82, 83, London, Longmans, Green & Co., 1871, Church and State, authority of the Pope over affairs of absolute obedience, it is boldly declared, is due to the Pope, at the peril of salvation, not alone in faith, in morals, but in all things which concern the discipline and government of the Church. Thus are swept into the papal net whole multitudes of facts, whole systems of government, prevailing, though in different degrees, in every country of the world, even in the United States, where the severance between Church and State is supposed to be complete. A long catalogue might be drawn of subjects belonging to the domain and competency of the State, but also undeniably affecting the government of the Church, such as, by way of example, marriage, burial, education, prison discipline, blasphemy, poor relief, incorporation, mortmain, religious endowments, vows of celibacy, and obedience. In Europe the circle is far wider, the points of contact and of interlacing, being, almost innumerable. But on all matters respecting which any pope may think proper to declare that they concern either faith or morals, or the government or discipline of the Church, he claims, with the approval of a council undoubtedly ecumenical in the Roman sense, the absolute obedience, at the peril of salvation, of every member of his communion. The Vatican decrees in their bearing on civil allegiance, Honorable W. E. Gladstone, M. P. pp. 80, 31. New York, Harper D. Brothers, 1875. Church and State, Results of Union of. Such was the compact that had been established between Higher Church and the State. As might be expected, the succeeding transactions exhibit an alternate preponderance of one and of the other, and the degradation of both in the end. History of the Intellectual Development of Europe, John William Draper, M. D. LL.D., Volume I, pp. 374, 375, New York, Harper D. Brothers, copyright 1876. Church and State, Effects of Union of. We have now approached the close of 1,000 years from the birth of Christ, the evil union of the Church and State, their rivalries, their intrigues, their quarrels, had produced an inevitable result, doing the same in the West that they had done in the East, disorganizing the political system, and ending in a universal social demoralization. Id. p. 376. Such was the issue of the second attempt at the union of political and ecclesiastical power. In a former chapter we saw what it had been in the East, now we have found what it was in the West. Inaugurated in selfishness, it strengthens itself by violence, is perpetuated by ignorance, and yields as its inevitable result, social ruin. Id. p. 377. Church and State, Injurious Effect of Union of. The greatest injury, however, did not arise from the inner relation of the controversies, but from a foreign influence, namely, the union of the State and its politics with the Church. The free internal development of the latter was endangered. Disputes were to be settled by imperial decrees. Thus a variety of passions intermingled with and troubled the dogmatic interest. Hence results followed dogmatic controversies which could not be derived from the development of contrarieties. Before the contrarieties had been fully expressed, one or the other party was put down by external influence. Lectures on the History of Christian Dogmas, Dr. Augustus Neander, Volume I, p. 259, London, George Bell D. Sons, 1882.